Newly developed games are constantly coming out. Sometimes they're new IPs, sometimes they're sequels or continuations of a familiar franchise, different takes on a familiar franchise, that kind of thing. It's kind of hard to keep up with everything new coming out. And that's why I think established franchises that have new games released for them, a lot of people gravitate towards. Maybe it's because they feel the risk is lessened of not knowing what they'll be getting themselves into, but I definitely feel it's that familiarity that drives a lot of gamers, be it franchises, developers, or publishers. I believe there's a lot of comfort in the familiar, especially when it comes to spending our hard earned money. And the one thing I tend to see a lot of mixed emotions on is when a game gets re released. You have things like remasters, remakes, definitive editions. And while I think most of us won't be losing any sleep about this stuff, I do find it interesting to discuss the problems people may have with these releases. Now, definitive editions is one category that causes some annoyance with gamers. Like, what does definitive really mean? Are you saying it's the best version, has the most content? Definitive should mean it's the final complete version, but I'm sure we can find tons of examples to argue about when it comes to that label. A lot of times, definitive in the gaming world may mean it's a release that has all the DLC or the add-ons added to that release, making it the complete release, maybe? Other times, who knows what the fuck it means? I mean, labels get tossed around quite often, and they can mean different things to different people. Now, what about remakes and remasters? When I think of remake, I think the game was completely remade from the ground up with new graphics, maybe even an old school 2D game being remade with 3D modern graphics type of thing. Remakes definitely divide people in the sense it can be quite difficult to consider those definitive. In those cases, a lot of times an earlier version of the game could be considered definitive even without the label attached. I mean, it's a very difficult and slippery slope to go down, but look at some of Squaresoft's remakes and releases over the years as an example. And yes, I know I said Squaresoft, not Square Enix. The early Final Fantasy games have had plenty of remakes, remasters, and ports that have had new additions to the game. And everyone who is a fan of that franchise will have a different answer as to which version they prefer. I tend to default to the original release in those cases myself, but that's just me, obviously. Now, I do look at additions to the original games without messing with the foundations to be an okay thing, sometimes a really cool thing. I mean, look at Final Fantasy VI on the Game Boy Advance as an example. It tends to get a lot of praise as it had additional content. And then later releases of the game didn't come with that content. So would that be considered the definitive edition of the game? Maybe for some, but also it took passionate fans to put out patches and ROM hacks for that version of the game to restore the sound and color. The original US Super Nintendo version of the game also had a lot of community work done to it, with retranslating it, restoring sprites that were changed from the Japanese release. I guess some might say the original Japanese version is the definitive one. Now, many games get remasters or some variation of re-release or port from, other console generations. I mean, just looking at the Switch, you'll see tons of that, from first-party games that were on like the Wii U, that kind of thing, to third-party stuff that was previously released and then brought over years later to the Switch. But a lot of times I think people get things mixed up when they hear remaster. Like with the Grand Theft Auto 3 trilogy, people seem to have expected remakes, but it almost seems like this release blurs the line of remake and remaster. Grand Theft Auto Trilogy, it runs via a different engine than what the original release did. Later Rockstar releases typically use the Rage engine, which is their in-house engine, and the earlier pre-Grand Theft Auto 4 games were using the Renderware engine originally. Now, the Grand Theft Auto trilogy, which those games used renderware, they're now going to be using the Unreal Engine. So Rockstar, they worked with Grove Street Games on this new version of the trilogy, which Grove Street, they did the portable mobile versions of them previously. And they did add a lot of visual tweaks with new lighting, high-res textures, upgrades to the environments and characters. And they also made some gameplay tweaks to bring it more in line with how more recent Grand Theft Auto games control and play. Now, the one question that is still out there that I've seen from tons of hesitant fans is if they relicensed all of the music. There's been no official word that I've seen as of yet, but if I were to guess, I'd be willing to bet that there will most likely be a lot of changes to the included music. Now, censorship, that's another concern I've seen people have. Will anything be censored? And if so, how much and what? To what extent, right? So far, I've only seen one example of censoring or editing that's been discovered. So, kind of seems like there may be more. In one scene, I guess it was in the trailer, one of the characters from the original game, he had like a Confederate flag on his T-shirt, and that's been changed to like a skull design instead. I think some people, they may see that as a big deal, and others will say it's a welcome change. I mean, it doesn't really change the game, but some people, they want to see it, remain what it originally was. I mean, either way, there's no way you're going to please everyone. The nature of these games will always bring the choice to be offended for some people. But also, if one thing has been changed, what else may have been removed or edited that will cause people to question this release being definitive? That's really the question. What has been changed? We know what you have done to make it look different or better or whatever, but what are the other changes involved? Now, I don't know how many people will consider the Grand Theft Auto trilogy to be truly the definitive edition when it comes to releases, but I always feel with releases, be it a remaster or remakes, that they're welcomed if done well. I mean, nostalgia will have many revisit these games, and then you'll have people who have never had the chance to play them have an opportunity to play them on their current consoles or PCs. I mean, if disc-based games were all backwards compatible on Sony and Microsoft's consoles, remakes and remasters may not make as much financial sense, without enough new content added to them. It's about choice in the end. I mean, choose which version of a game is the best and don't buy or care about what doesn't interest you. That's typically what I say with remasters, remakes, deluxe editions, whatever the case may be. The only time I really have an issue is like when you buy a game and then like the definitive version comes out right after. That kind of sucks, like within a few months. But it's kind of almost to be expected nowadays. I mean, just the way it is. Now, I mean, if you are interested in the Grand Theft Auto trilogy, there is one little bit of information that I wanted to share with you, and that's the Switch physical version. It definitely doesn't have all of the game data on this cartridge. So is it the definitive edition physically? I mean, it requires a download. So there's that, man. Make your choice. I'm probably going to pick this game up. I don't know about getting it on the Switch, though, which is unfortunate. I'd like to have my game, if I'm buying it physically, all be there for Nintendo Switch games. Like, I don't like that download required symbol on them. Like, that's the one thing with Switch games. Like, I try not to buy those types of games just because I don't like that idea that, I mean, I may as well just buy it digitally because the game's not all there anyway. And if the future comes and the Switch Online services are shut down, the servers are gone, can I still play my cartridge? When I see that label on a cartridge's case for the Switch, gives me some pause, some hesitation, kind of thinking about the future. The now is fine for the most part if you have the storage to download whatever they needed to, do digitally, since they didn't want to, cop for a higher storage card for the system. But, it is what it is. Appreciate you guys hanging with me. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. That said, I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.